That's true. Look at this. Watch.
So he stood up like...
Look at that. It's ridiculous.
He can't do it.
What? His right foot's down, his left foot's up, and he just goes straight up in the air. It is crazy.
That's fake.
What could be the real truth about the most controversial moon landing?
2, 1, 0. Getting feet 2.5 down. Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Well, we have some proof from Whitney Webb, who says the moon landing is not what you're being told.
The moon.
I said that video is fake.
No, the video is real.
The Genesis. The world has witnessed several mind-blowing events, and some of them have remained in history for a long time. However, some of these mind-blowing events have sparked great controversies for many years, and the popular moon landing is on top of the list.
We can see you coming down the ladder now. I'm at the foot of the ladder.
For over 50 years now, there has been a whole lot of noise about the moon landing, and there are several parties around the subject matter. Some think it is the greatest hoax of all time, and some think of it as one of man's greatest achievements. However, when we critically consider the story and the genesis of the moon landing, with the proofs that are flying around the internet too, we may be able to pick a side. So, before it makes sense, we would have to pick up from where it all began.
The Eagle has landed.
Shortly before the 1960s, no one would have thought that something like the moon landing would happen anytime soon. At least, not for a country like the United States. When you talk of space exploration, the United States was way behind at the time. The country didn't have a space center, let alone a rocket. So, for a country that had no single record of a space travel attempt, you bet that the president would sound like a comedian when he suddenly came out to give a speech at the start of the 1960s, saying that the United States would send men to the moon before the end of the decade.
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
And, without wasting any time, he set up a space center, and research started immediately. Now, that was where the questions first set in. Did the president develop some strong interests in the moon overnight? And, even if he did, why was he so quick to set up a space center and start plans in such a rush? Well, conspiracy theorists were quick to figure out what sparked the sudden interest, and they seem to make a lot of sense. While the United States was still focusing on other things that mattered at the time, their biggest rival, the Soviet Union, was completely invested in space travel. In fact, just before President Kennedy made the announcement, the Soviets had just sent the first man to space. They sent a cosmonaut named Yuri Gagarin to orbit the Earth, and he returned safely with the title of the first man in space.
Восток на орбиту. Космонавт товарищ Гагарин перенес удовлетворительно.
Thinking about it, that shouldn't have bothered the United States so much, but because they were in a silent war with the Soviet Union over world power, the US government felt a great loss. I mean, their rival holding the title of the first man in space, while they knew next to nothing about space, was a huge blow. It was just like the Soviets declared themselves the boss, while the United States looked like a clown. So you can imagine the US government becoming restless and brainstorming ways to daze the world and show the Soviets who the boss was. In the picture painted by conspiracy theorists, the US government would have a series of secret meetings until it all came together one day. Voila! The government would send people to the moon, or at least pretend to, as long as it earns the nation the title of the first man on the moon, and some massive respect all over the world. So, that explains why the government was so fast to build a space center, pump funds into the moon landing project, and with just a few years of research, the first space capsule was set to be launched. However, the whole Apollo project started off on the wrong foot, and this makes the entire project questionable. On the 27th of January 1967, a ground test was scheduled to be held at Cape Canaveral Spaceport in Florida. The intention of the engineers was to test the Apollo 1 space capsule to be sure that it was ready for space. But, to their shock, the space capsule was far from being fit, and the ground test ended in a disaster. In fact, it became the news of tragedy because the astronauts got trapped in the space capsule before a fire broke out. So, let's just say the Apollo 1 space capsule finished its task before it even started, and all that was left were the burnt bodies of 3 astronauts. But since the government was hell-bent on the moon landing, the engineers resumed work shortly after the tragedy, and in less than 2 years later, they were ready for another space mission. And this time, the Apollo 7 mission was successful. The astronauts orbited the Earth and came back safely. After the success of the Apollo 7 mission, the United States was now on the same level with the Soviets, but President Kennedy wasn't done. It was now time for them to switch things up a bit and go for the moon landing. However, does a successful orbiting of the Earth mean that the moon landing was also possible? Well, I guess not. For the landing to really work, a lot of work would go into it. And the US government seems to have tried. Before the most controversial Apollo 11 mission, which was the moon landing proper, 3 other unpopular missions were launched. Or, so we were told. The first of those 3 was the Apollo 8 mission, which was launched to find out what was hidden in the dark sides of the moon. Blame the paranormal enthusiasts who seem to think that something dark could be happening on the moon for that. So, according to reports, 3 astronauts went on the Apollo 8 mission to explore the dark sides of the moon. However, these guys probably just peeped through the window, and there was no landing. They reported they went round the moon 10 times, and they returned back to Earth when they didn't see anything strange.
Refusing to be enslaved by a species it deemed inferior.
But the US government was still not done with playing around the moon. Right after the Apollo 8 mission, Apollo 9 and 10 were launched in the same month, and they had the same mission. Both space capsules were used to test the transfer from the shuttle to the landing capsule, and according to NASA, both missions were successful. So, with the success of Apollo 9 and 10, the Apollo 11 mission launched with 2 astronauts who would later become the symbols of bravery and subjects of controversy. Yeah, those are 2 extremes, but Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong had to face both the honor and the mockery. Well, according to history, the Saturn V rocket launched from the Kennedy Space Center on the 16th of July, 1969.
Ignition. Liftoff.
And after about 76 hours of travel through space, the rocket landed on the moon. Then, on the next day, their feet touched the sands on the moon as the whole world streamed. Everyone was happy for a while, and the news of the first moon landing became the pride of the United States. However, questions began to rise, and the joy of the moon landing soon disappeared in the midst of skepticism. So, what was the reason for this skepticism, and what proof backs them up? Well, you're about to find out.
There's a lot of weirdness with the moon landing.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you wanted to have like a conspiracy that to wrap your head around that's exciting, it's one of the best ones.
The controversy. Conspiracy theorists believe that moon landing is the greatest lie the world has ever been told. And sadly, the whole world fell for it until some people began to think of it critically. From where it all started, these people believed that the whole moon landing idea was just born out of rivalry. And that is one proof that the United States government might have done anything to appear like the winner of the secret war, even if it took lying to the whole world about the moon landing.
It did because it showed military superiority over the Russians, so we were able to do that.
Sure.
It also, it was the Nixon administration. People were just flat out full of shit.
Well, yeah.
I mean, they were just lying to people left and right back then.
That's government, though.
Yeah, but even more so then because it was unchecked. There was no media.
Social media.
Yeah, there's nothing that would expose them for this.
Though the Soviet Union and the United States kept denying that there was a hidden battle for power going on, the Soviets also made secret plans to go on a moon trip shortly after the acclaimed success of the moon landing. However, things became fishy when they could not achieve their plans. Now, that would sound really strange, right? I mean, the Soviets were even more advanced in space business, and they took interest in space even before the United States woke up from sleep. In fact, the head of NASA at the time of the Apollo project was a Nazi guy. This shows that the Soviets were really far ahead of the United States in this space thing. So, the fact that they could not even achieve the moon landing feat is enough evidence that it took more than the United States claimed, and this became the beginning of the controversy. At first, the conspiracies were all underground, and a lot of people still believed the lie. However, the murmurs became louder, and it looked like the evidence had always been there, but the people were too happy to see it. Or, it could be because the technology wasn't so advanced, and the people were not really able to verify the things that were shown on TV. Firstly, the fact that the government had all it took to build rockets, but were not able to stream the moon landing in a better resolution, speaks volume. The government clearly knew that television networks were streaming the event for curious people all over the world. However, the best they could provide was a fourth-generation video resolution. Well, as expected, this got people thinking and wondering if that was a way of hiding the lies that were written all over the video and pictures which were supposedly from space. So, on this podcast episode, the guest thoroughly examined the video from space and concluded that the event was probably faked.
If Gilligan's Island went from black and white to color in 1965, NASA can afford a color camera on the moon. After all, it is the most technologically advanced event. Why wouldn't they want a high-resolution color camera? They didn't because it might show that it's a fake scene, which it was. That's why they degraded the signal by fourth generation.
But that's not even the climax of the controversy. People continued to dig deep, and they realized that most of the videos and photos they claimed were from space were probably recorded and edited so that they would look like they were recorded on the moon. In fact, some of them looked like they were being played in reverse.
Wire, like they're being yanked up into the air.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what the are they doing? And they're playing, like falling down, and it's very weird.
At first, they won with some of the videos, since a lot of people in the 1960s did not really have so much knowledge about space and video editing. Most of the video sharing platforms and internet access we have right now were not in existence too. So, you can imagine that the entire family sits before the TV to watch a live stream of the supposed moon landing, and they never get to see the videos again. How would they have been able to verify that the videos they saw were real or fake? Yeah, the government or whoever came up with a plan to deceive the people knew this, and they were able to take advantage of it. They probably wouldn't have known that the videos would make it through decades and remain on the internet for the critical eyes to see. Well, thanks to the internet, more videos keep showing up, and it gets obvious that the whole moon landing thing might have been a big fluke anyway.
Oh, that's true. Look at this. Watch.
So he stood up like...
Look at that. It's ridiculous.
You can't do it.
What? His right foot's down, his left foot's up, and he just goes straight up in the air. It is crazy.
That's fake.
However, there are still many people who seem to be in total support of the moon landing, and even as these mind-boggling videos and pictures show, they would have explanations for them. Some believe that the videos might have really been recorded on the moon, and the weird movements might be because the moon has 1/6 of the Earth's gravity. Somehow, they could be correct, but whether the videos are real or not, there are other factors that contribute to the controversy around the moon landing. So many reports from the late 1960s and early 1970s have added to the layers of doubts which surround the moon landing saga. An example of that is a report which says that all of the souvenirs the astronauts claim to have brought from the moon were lies, too. They claimed that the moon dust smells like gunpowder, but the supposed moon dust Neil Armstrong brought back to the Earth had no smell. However, he was quick to blame it on days of travel through space. Just shortly after the moon dust issue, reports also say that the moon rock they claimed to bring back to Earth was just dry wood. What sense do we make of that? Maybe we should blame it on space travel too. Anyway, the dots connected when critics went back to the press conference Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin did when they came from the moon, or supposed did, in 1969.
To this historic mission. Some way, when those two Americans stepped on the moon.
Looking at the press conference video, you could see through the lies and fear which was in the atmosphere. According to critics, their body language in that press conference showed that they were probably hiding something or lying about something. So, the press conference video became one of the pieces of evidence that conspiracy theorists consistently pointed at to show that the whole moon landing thing must have been a lie. Or at least, not exactly what they told us it was.
From 1969, when they returned from the moon, is one of the most cryptic, weird things you'll ever see. These guys look like they just stole something, and they're being questioned. I've never seen a video where people look like they're more full of shit than that video of the press conference from 1969.
Well, the whole drama continued. The government kept covering things up, and those who believed strongly in the moon landing kept on believing. In fact, they were celebrating the moon landing anniversary, and thousands of people gathered to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the moon landing in 1994. However, it was at this 25th anniversary that the big controversy sparked up again, and more people who believed in the moon landing started to wonder if they had really been fooled. Guess what? The bone of contention was, this time, Neil Armstrong's speech. Neil's speech at the 25th anniversary of the moon landing remains one of the most controversial public speeches in the history of America until today.
Gene Shoemaker even called in one of his comets to mark the occasion with spectacular Jovian fireworks.
Knowing the dust which the moon landing had raised for over 2 decades, Neil Armstrong said things about how the new generation should uncover the layers of truth, and that has everyone wondering.
We have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
After that speech, and what Neil Armstrong could have meant, more people began to give attention to the facts and truths that were unveiled. In fact, scientists and researchers were now bold enough to be loud about the reasons the moon landing was impossible. According to a guest on the JRE podcast, the atmosphere of the moon wouldn't have given the astronauts a chance to come back alive, even if they really landed on the moon. As scientists have mentioned, so many catastrophes could happen on the moon, and the one with the highest possibility is an encounter with micrometeorites. For every 24 hours spent on the moon, there is a 50% chance of being hit by micrometeorites. And according to reports, Neil and Buzz spent 3 days on the moon. This means that there is more than a 100% chance that they would encounter these micrometeorites and they would not be able to make it back to Earth, even if they landed on the moon.
We found documentation from von Braun that says every 24 hours on the moon, there's a 50% chance of a catastrophic, deadly error because of decompression from a micrometeorite. So they were there 3 days. They were 150% chance they would have been killed from a micrometeorite.
However, their moon videos showed them walking around, and they even looked like they were playing in some videos.
Up and over hill and dale.
Think about it. How were they protected from the micrometeorites that move at such a high speed every second? Definitely not their spacesuits, which were made by a lingerie company, right? Could this be evidence that they probably just designed a place, made it look like the moon, and then made those videos to deceive the public? I guess we have an answer already. Well, as the argument gets hotter, one of the engineers in charge of rockets during the Apollo project threw another bombshell. According to him, 3 rockets were needed to go on such a trip into space, land on the moon, and return safely to Earth. However, the astronauts only went to the moon in the Saturn V rocket and came back safely. But it gets even sneakier. The scientists say that the 3 rockets must have a specific weight for them to even be effective. But guess what, guys? The Saturn V rocket was not even close to the requirement in any way. And you know what that means. Okay, the facts are even endless, and shockingly, these proof that we've been fooled for a long time seem inexhaustible. But the most recent one is the contribution of Elon Musk. Ever since he took an interest in space, Elon Musk has been so invested in his research and plans to go to space. He has even sent robots to space recently, and the guys seem to be doing a good job sending pictures and mapping out the whole place. However, when it comes to the moon landing topic, this is where Elon Musk comes in. Recently, he announced his plans to set up another visit to the moon. But his strategies and discoveries have shown that there may be a lot of lies around the 1969 moon landing. According to him, about 10 fuel trips are needed before the actual visit to the moon. This means that the 3 rockets designed for the mission will have to travel at least 10 times so that the astronauts can calculate the right amount of fuel needed for the journey. However, there was nothing like that before the Apollo 11 mission, and this discovery speaks volume. It would mean that they probably did not even take the trip at all.
That's exactly what Von Braun said in one of my clips at Sabrel.com. You have to make multiple fuel trips to go to the moon first to a space station, and then from there you can go. Elon Musk said the same thing. But how did they do it with a rocket that contained 1/30,000% of the amount of fuel?
Why didn't they return? As the dots connected, the conspiracy theorists came up with a question. If the moon landing was so successful on the first trial, and it made the United States and the whole world happy, why have they never made attempts to return to the moon? I mean, reliving the experience won't hurt, right? It should even make more sense now that the technology is better, and the researchers have access to more resources. But there is only one answer to that question. You only return to a place you have been in the first place. Though the United States government had so much to say about this answer, the government has not been able to convince anyone. Not with the evidence that has shown their fishy moves. At first, the government went on and on about how a lot of money is needed for the project, and there is no budget for such missions. Then, the next excuse was the danger the journey would pose to the lives of the astronauts. And the next was the possibility of a moon disease being transferred to Earth, or some paranormal activities being unleashed. Well, all those excuses may make sense to anyone who wants to fall for the lies, but one thing is clear. There is a very high chance that the moon landing never really happened. NASA and the government most definitely didn't know what it took, and they probably never tried. Maybe what they called a moon landing was just a video shoot session which they properly planned out for a few years and executed just to prove their military superiority over the Soviet Union, and also gain more respect in the world. It could also be that the moon landing was carried out, but they cooked up more lies to make it more dramatic. and the lies have now backfired. Nobody really knows the whole truth. Well, maybe except Buzz, Neil, and the NASA guys. Outro. All right, let's call it a wrap, guys. Hope you found this video interesting. What are your thoughts about the moon landing? Do you think it was real, or some lies that we all fell for? Let us know what you think about this video in the comments section below. And if you have any questions about this topic, you can ask in the comments as well.